And so resilience is developing that mindset of naming your reality, the good, the bad, the ugly of the reality, and cultivating the I can belief. I can do this. I don't like this. I don't like pandemic living, and I can do it. And I think that is just a really important part of resilience, because oftentimes we think of resilience as just positive thinking,
Right.
and it's not necessarily. It is learning to identify the reality and cultivate that voice of truth in your mind.
This is Brandon Smith, and of course, I'm the host of the Workplace Therapist Show podcast. And today's episode, we've got Mazi Robinson coming on. I've had Mazi on the show before. She's a licensed professional counselor and a speaker. Mazi is fantastic because she really allows us to have a conversation diving into mental health today and talking about the things she's actually seeing. So in our show today, if we were to sum it all up, we would talk about the epidemic of anxiety and how the pandemic has really contributed to that deep depletion we've been feeling from anxiety. Mazi's got some great practical tips on how we can overcome that, develop some agency and resilience, and push through and get back to maybe our old selves. So I just know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Stay tuned to notes at the very end, and I'll highlight some of the key points I took away. But with all these shows, think about what's your big takeaway from today you can start to use to make yourself more full and more vibrant and get back to your old self. Mazi, really excited to have you back on the show again here today. It's been a little while.
It has been, yes.
And I think the first time we talked, it was during the early stages of the pandemic. And we came in, we got to talk about some of the things that folks were starting to feel, starting to encounter.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, when we didn't know how long this thing was going to go.
That's right.
And now here we are in kind of the tail end of it. Maybe done, maybe still, who knows where we're at in that. But life is starting to resume somewhat normalcy again.
Yes.
So before we jump into our conversation about what you're seeing and mental health and anxiety, for listeners that didn't catch your first show, share a little about your journey. Share with us a little about not only what got you doing what you're doing, but what you are doing here today.
Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me back. I am honored to be here, and I've been so excited to chat. So I'm a licensed professional counselor here in the Atlanta area. I have been practicing for 16 years now. Which
16.
I know. I'm a whole
phenomenal
person who can drive. It's amazing to me that it has been that long. I specialize in working with adult women on self-esteem, self-worth concerns, relationship concerns, and life stage transitions. Prior to becoming a therapist, I was a high school history teacher. Loved that. And then prior to that, I am actually a classically trained opera singer. So in a very former life. But in addition to my counseling practice, I also do a good bit of speaking to various organizations, churches, schools, companies, etc. And I am also the founder and director of Cultivate, which is an organization that provides counseling to women in the Atlanta area. And we also host gatherings that are open to the public. And our mission is to help women cultivate joy, courage, and freedom in their lives. And I'm married, 19 years last week.
Wow.
I know. So
congratulations.
we're coming up on the big 20th. And I have two boys, 11 and 6.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Your life is very full.
It is. It is. It is very full. Lots of good variety in my life.
So talking about variety,
Yeah.
you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing that maybe is unique or different right now from the clients that are coming to reach out to you. What vibe are you getting out there, either where people are just in terms of optimism or even what they're feeling right now? What are some of the challenges they're trying to overcome?
We are very tired. And we're tired in a way that is different from the pre-pandemic. You know, life before March of 2020, people would come in and talk about feeling burned out, feeling stressed, feeling anxious, but this is kind of next level. And
that's scary to say.
It is.
You said burnout, but this is like next level. I'm holding on to my chair.
That's right.
Yet I can also I also know what you're saying. I get it, but
Yeah.
To share a little bit more about this next level idea.
And I think what makes it next level is we can't get untired. And, prior to the pandemic, we'd take a vacation, we'd tweak some things with our schedule, we would get to the summer months and we could restore ourselves, renew ourselves. But what has been happening over the past now 2.5 years is we keep getting hit by these waves of uncertainty and things that are out of our control, and we can't get our footing again. One of the analogies that I've used a lot over the past 2 years is it's like you're wading into the ocean, and it's, the ocean's lovely and kind of calm, so I'm gonna wade in a little deeper, and you get about to your knees or your thighs, and then all of a sudden a huge wave comes, and you kind of stumble, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go back to my beach chair, and so you turn and you start walking back towards the shore, and then another wave comes and hits you in the back and you stumble forward, and then another wave comes and your hat gets knocked off and your sunglasses get knocked off and you're drenched and you never planned on swimming, and you look up and you're like, where's my beach chair? And it's like way down the beach, and you're just so discombobulated. And I think that has been our experience for the past 2.5 years. It has been one wave after another of this very intense stress, very intense uncertainty, so much conflict that we are surrounded with in our communities and in our country and in the world. And it's like we can't get restored. We can't get renewed. And so we're living in kind of this chronic state of depletion. And then as a result of that, we are feeling more anxious. We aren't handling things the way that we would have handled them pre-pandemic. Thus, we're seeing more conflict and crazy stories. I remember a couple of months ago, I saw a story about a fight that broke out at a Golden Corral, just an all-out brawl because they ran out of steak. And like, I love a good buffet and steak as much as anybody, but it's a pretty drastic response to running out of steak at the Golden Corral.
I mean, you got to have a steak. You got to have a steak.
And I just have to think that those individuals probably wouldn't have handled that situation in that way in 2019. So we're just so tired, and it's creating a ripple effect into how we handle things, how we see things, how we're internalizing things.
Yeah, hearing you say that, it's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that it's interesting to go from tired to angry.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, I understand it's on the same wavelength of kind of emotional depletion, and then so your defenses are down, your guard is down, and it's easy to get triggered. But I think everyone can relate. I mean, we see it on the roads every day.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, while traffic is coming back, there are some angry, bad drivers, and I'm not sure if it's just because they haven't been practicing for 2 years, or man, they are just really upset.
Right.
And even, I've always taken my kids to Disney. I'm a big Disney fan. They're having record numbers of brawls and fights in the parks.
That's right.
And I mean, and these aren't just like a couple slaps. It's like whole families are getting into conflict, and security's not able to really break them apart.
Yeah.
And it's just really disturbing to see. And I think one of the challenges is, as a mentor of mine shared with me years ago, if we think about kind of human developmental theory, we tend to match levels. So, when someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't go, oh, I'm sure they're having a bad day. You go on.
You go.
Our first reaction is not that. It would be great if it was.
Yeah.
Our first reaction is, oh, yeah? Really? I think I can show you.
Yes.
And so that's a real danger for us, particularly if we're not kind of on guard.
Right.
So I want to explore this a little bit more before we talk about kind of practical things we can do. So we talked about kind of those angry outbursts might be one symptom or sign. What are maybe some other symptoms or signs that you see from clients that come in that leads you to say they are either really, really tired or they've got some level of anxiety that's starting to get in the way of living the life they want to live? Yes.
And I think just in general, our anxiety is still very high. At the start of the pandemic, throughout the pandemic, we saw higher and higher self-reports of people feeling anxious, people experiencing depressive symptoms. And I would say that is still the case. And how that is manifesting in people's lives, people are feeling more easily overwhelmed by day-to-day tasks, struggling to make decisions, ruminating over decisions, and again, not handling things in the most effective or productive way. So often our, not to go back to this anger point, but for instance, so often our anger is actually just unaddressed anxiety. And I really think that the level of anger that we're seeing right now in society, it is because we're so anxious and we don't know how to sit with the anxiety, get curious about the anxiety, understand our anxiety. But I think also our anxiety is manifesting in a louder inner critic. A lot of people are reporting more struggles with self-criticism, struggles with feeling motivated. So often I hear people say, I used to feel just so motivated and I was able to get things done and I just had more creativity, and now I just have no motivation and nothing really interests me. And again, I think that is connected to our anxiety. And it's not an obvious connection because we think anxiety, I'm nervous and I'm anxious, but it's that depletion. And if we stay anxious long enough, we become depleted. And we're just depleted because we have been living in this fight or flight mode for 2.5 years. And you stay in that long enough and it does impact your motivation. It does impact your creativity, your desire to take care of things. It increases that overall sense of kind of apathy and cynicism. And that's the other thing with us feeling anxious. We feel so out of control. COVID was out of our control. And wherever you fell on the mask debate, it felt out of your control. And politics feels out of our control. And what's going on in the world feels out of control. And now the economy feels out of our control. And so, again, this onslaught of things feeling out of our control, eventually we can begin to feel like, what's the point? Like, I'm just going to have to pay the $4.69 for gas, and and that cynicism and apathy, and it just zaps us. We're just still zapped.
Yeah, so it's interesting hearing you talk, because as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, I see this almost on a macro level. Our unemployment rate's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
It's good. And yet every single organization I talk to, company, nonprofit, doesn't matter, they can't get people.
Yes.
And
fascinating.
Yeah. And basically what everyone's concluded is there's some folks still on the sidelines that have not come back. Maybe they retired early. They said, you know what, I'm 65. I was going to retire anyway. I'm done. But I think there's a whole other group that is still on the sidelines. And there may be reasons, like they're still dealing with some personal challenges that they're dealing with their own family, maybe health care for family members, or education for their children. But there could be a lot of this going on too, where people just feel like, I don't feel motivated, I don't feel ready. I'll just stay here.
And I think also with that, COVID was, this isn't an exact correct use of the phrase, but it was a brush with death. Like COVID, what really heightened our sense of our own mortality, right? Yeah. This invisible force that could get you really sick, and
you're right.
It could turn.
Whether we talk literally or figuratively, it's this thing out there that who knows what it is and how it's going to operate, and and it could be quite drastic.
Right, exactly. And again, it's out of your control. And so I think also for a lot of people, just related to this with the employment and the Great Resignation, it's like, I don't know when this rodeo might be over. And is this the guy I really want to work for? Is this the team I really want to be on? Is this what I really want to do? Like, there's just been a huge existential crisis, which only adds to our sense of anxiousness and I want to make better decisions now. And it's just so interesting how it's impacted us.
Totally. So every year I try and pick a word of my favorite word of the year. Like, this is my word of the year. And the last 2 years I've had the same word. And the word that is my word of the year this year, is the same for last year, is agency.
Oh, uh-huh.
Okay, I can tell you like this word.
I like that word, yes.
Because part of what you're talking about really is people don't have a sense of agency.
Yes.
They don't have a sense of what's in my control.
Yes.
And how do I kind of feel that comfort, that agency? Like I'm enough for the world. I'm not overwhelmed by it. I'm enough. So how, maybe this is a big question, maybe this is $1 billion question. How do you get that? How do we help people reclaim that or rediscover that?
And that is the big question. Over the past couple of years, I've spent so much time reading about COVID and its impact on our mental health and where we go from here. And I think part of the reason I keep reading is because I keep hoping that somebody will have a better answer than the answers that I'm reading. But the answer that I keep coming back to, and how do we take care of ourselves? How do we safeguard our mental health right now? And it comes back to this idea of agency, identifying what you can and you cannot control. I cannot control this person next to me who doesn't believe the way I do, who doesn't behave the way I think they should behave, but I can control myself. I can control how I respond. I can control how I internalize what that person's doing. I can control if I stay in this job. I can control my mindset around this job. And we really resist identifying what we can and can't control because we want to put all of our energy inevitably towards the things we can't control, right? I just want to ruminate over this person who's driving me crazy, and I want to ruminate over my boss and how I think they're not leading the company well, and I want to ruminate over these family members that are driving me crazy. And we put all of our energy there rather than recognizing, yes, there is so much in this world that I can't control, and it can be big, scary stuff, but there's actually a ton that I can control. I can control when I get up in the morning and if I run late, and then if I'm stressed in traffic. There are things that I can control. And so really, almost like setting a firm internal boundary with ourselves of, let me get real clear. What can I control and what do I need to release and surrender? And I just have to every day or every hour just keep putting those things down, just keep putting my boss down, just keep putting the family member down, and let me focus on what it is that I can control.
So hearing you say that sparked something for me.
Yeah.
Okay. And you used the word ruminate. And I love that, but it actually sparked a different image for me. It sparked the image of being in a room. Being in a room, the same room, every day, over and over again, for 2 years, looking at a camera and having meetings on Zoom or Teams, and every day is like the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. It's like you wake up and it's the same song and you go through the same routine every single day. And in the beginning, I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like you don't have to deal with traffic, and you can just be in your pajamas, and in fact, no one knows what pants you're wearing. Like I had a client, he always wears suits, and the other day he was at home and he was wearing kind of a nice golf shirt. He's like, I got to fix the window. He stands up, he's just wearing like shorts. It was hysterical, like elastic shorts. I was like, well, okay, Andrew, I guess you do you, man. That's great. But I have found in the beginning, while I love that, the more I spent time in that room, I ruminated. The more I spent time in that room, I ruminated about all the things you mentioned.
That's right.
I wasn't going out. So it does prompt us to go out. Now, I also noticed, this is something I want to talk to you about, as I started going out doing more public speaking, I was having panic attacks. Like stuff that had never happened to me before. Like it was freaking me out. I was really getting anxious, and I was losing my voice. It was because I was rusty. I don't know what it was. So it pivots into another word that I think is important for us, which is challenging, and that's resilience, right? And building that muscle, which is forcing us to leave the room and go out. I mean, because I think it's really hard to accomplish what we're talking about here if you're going to ruminate in the room. Absolutely. If you're in the room, you're ruminating. So you've got to leave the room, which I think is a challenge. So that was all what went through my head as you were talking. I would love to get your reaction to that, if that feels true to you, and if so, what do we do with that?
And I completely agree with you, about the impact of being at home and the screen and the room. And We're now 2.5 years, and so it's going to be interesting to see the impact of remote work, because the thing about it, it does isolate us, and we are not our mentally healthiest selves in isolation. And as much as you maybe hated your commute into the office and you really didn't want to hear about Bob's weekend, that's actually healthy for you. The commute is a healthy transition, and that small chat and the door jam conversations, they are variety that keep your mind sharp and awake and alert. And so, yes, it does come down to how do we build resilience? And resilience is such an interesting word of, we often think it's one thing, but in my opinion, I think it's another. And what I discovered in the pandemic is, for a lot of people, like, you gotta be resilient. So you just gotta keep on keeping on. You gotta choose joy, and that's really not not resilience. Resilience, I have found, particularly over the past 2 years, it is naming the hard. And it is saying, this is really hard. This is what's making me feel anxious. I love public speaking, but I feel abnormally anxious right now doing it. This feels odd to me, almost not in my skin. And it's naming what is actually going on, the hard, the good, the bad. And then it's using the word and. So this is hard. This feels really anxious. I'm not enjoying this like I used to. And I know that I have the skill set to do this. And I believe that I can figure out a solution. And I believe I will be okay, even if I don't know what okay really looks like right now. Mm-hmm. And so resilience is developing that mindset of naming your reality, the good, the bad, the ugly of the reality, and cultivating the I can belief. I can do this. I don't like this. I don't like pandemic living, and I can do it. And I think that is just a really important part of resilience, because oftentimes we think of resilience as just positive thinking,
right.
and it's not necessarily. It is learning to identify the reality and cultivate that voice of truth in your mind.
So I want to add something just from my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's absolutely true. I agree with that. What's also helped me is then adding another and, which is then go doing it. So then I have a proof point that my belief statement was correct.
Yes.
Like, I still have that fear in the back of my mind that, my voice is locked up before, it could lock up this time, but the last 3 times I've been okay, and it was good. And then the next time it's good, and I got 4, and I got 5. But I need the proof points to add more weight to the belief statements that I want to be true,
yes,
versus the negative belief statements that I don't want to be true.
Yes.
So I'm curious if that's because we can stay in our rooms and ruminate and go through this mental exercise of trying to build resilience. But I think there's a doing it that's an important part of it. That's my experience.
I 100% agree. And that links us back to our discussion around anxiety. When we are anxious, no matter what you are anxious about, whether it be a pandemic, having a conversation with someone, asking someone out on a date, whatever it is, you can go to the best therapist in the world. You can read every book on anxiety. But the only thing that frees us from anxiety is doing the thing we are scared to do, as the only thing. You can work on that mindset. You can have Post-its all over your house with positive affirmations. But if you are not engaging...
I immediately saw the picture of that cat just like barely holding on. It says, hang in there on the poster. One of those motivational posters.
You can wallpaper your house with those things. But if you are not engaging in that behavior change, if you are not stepping outside of your comfort zone and doing the thing that you are afraid to do, then that anxious voice will continue to have a lot of power in your life. And that comfort zone, that bedroom that you work in your home, will become your prison. And so, yes, I completely agree. It is doing the thing, that it is doing the behavior that will reinforce that truth you're trying to cultivate in your mind.
It makes me think about athletes or musicians, and they often talk about when you get into flow, which is that idea of being in the zone.
Yeah.
That in that point you're not thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And so we can almost overthink it, right? Because then now we're getting into the technical, how I'm going to throw this ball, I'm going to play this instrument, and then it never turns out the way that we want it to. And I find for me, the more I do it, the more I can get myself back in that position, and I'm not thinking. I'm just,
Yes.
I'm in that flow state.
Yes.
But the more I spend time in the room, the more I'm not going to do that.
Exactly. And this is one of those truths that people don't want to hear, like, no, but it's so important. So often we avoid things because we think, oh, if I avoid that, then I don't feel anxious. And so that's how I manage my anxiety, by avoiding that thing. But avoidance just makes our anxiety grow. Avoidance is never the path to freedom. It is never the path to health, if you will. It just exacerbates it. And so it is overcoming that avoidance pattern.
So I love that idea that the more you avoid it, the bigger it grows. And again, I guess the way my brain's working today, I immediately thought back to my youngest, Aaron, who's 15 now. But when he was little, he was terrified of Ursula at the end of the Little Mermaid movie.
Yes.
Terrified.
Yes,
Terrified.
I understand
We
that.
could watch Indiana Jones movies with guys' hearts getting ripped out. He was like, oh, this is a great movie. But Ursula shows up. Oh, no. Full stop. Full stop.
Yeah.
And there's a Little Mermaid ride in one of the Disney parks, and there's Ursula outside. And as soon as he would see Ursula, he would just like grab us really tight, like end of the world.
Right.
And I had to finally take him into my office and pull up a YouTube clip and show the very end of the movie where Ursula kind of, it's the end of Ursula.
Yeah.
And he watched it and he was like, oh, she's not that scary after all.
Right.
And then it ended right there.
Right.
But he wouldn't face it. And the more he wouldn't face her, the bigger and bigger it got, to where Ursula was the only thing in the world that really petrified him. Everything else was fine. Roller coaster's fine. Ursula, no go. So I think there's something about just facing it and actually doing it. Okay.
Absolutely.
So if we start to land our plane a little bit here, what are some good tips or takeaways if people are listening to this right now? And oh, by the way, one more thing I want to add just to validate your point. I had a client of mine who worked with an all virtual company for many years, and they were virtual before the pandemic. And she said, and she wasn't sure if it was if this was the chicken or the egg, what came first, but she said, because she oversaw HR as one of her functions, she said, we have a higher than average population of employees that need a lot of mental health support.
Interesting.
And again, back then it wasn't, maybe that was why they chose all virtual, because it was just easier for them in their life, or was the all virtual contributing to it? But either way, if we take that as an example, that's the path we're heading down. So if folks are listening to this and they say, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I felt that. Either in a generalized sense, or like me, going out and speaking in public is freaking me out. What are some steps they can start to take to get back on the path of feeling healthy, feeling strong, having that sense of agency and resilience that we've been talking about today?
Great question. And there are, many different ways to answer that question. The first thing that comes to my mind is to get curious. Get curious about your anxiety. Oftentimes we're feeling anxious and we think, oh, there's something wrong with me, I'm feeling anxious. And then we feel anxious about our anxiety, right? And so I encourage people, let's just get curious about it, just objectively curious. What is it that I'm feeling anxious about? And let me name all the things and let me play that tape out. I'm afraid if I bomb this next speaking gig, then I won't be asked back, and then they'll tell this company, oh, he won that, great, and it'll create let's go ahead and play it out. Let's go ahead and play out the worst case scenario. So I think getting curious about all the things that I'm feeling anxious about, even writing them down, because our anxious thoughts, they have to get out. When we keep things inside our minds, they sound right as rain. But if we can speak them aloud to a friend, to a counselor, if we can write them down in a journal, we begin to see, oh, well, that's a little extreme, or, oh, I see the lie in that. We can begin to tease the lie out from the truth. So I think getting curious about our anxiety, creating, if we are anxious about doing specific things, this isn't so much the case now, but earlier in the pandemic, a lot of people had COVID anxiety and re-entering social, like going back to restaurants or going to parties again. And so then, I've identified, I'm feeling anxious about eating out again. And so begin to think of creating, okay, baby steps, all right? So I'm going to walk into the restaurant and pick up my food, okay?
Yeah.
I could do that. Okay, I'm going to walk into the restaurant, pick up my food, and then I'm going to sit outside at their outdoor eating area. And so baby steps, how can I begin to face this anxiety in a baby step way? The other thing that comes to mind is really to begin to look at your connections in your life. Isolation, along with avoidance, isolation exacerbates anxiety, again, because you're not reality checking any of your anxious thoughts. You're not exposing yourself to the potential of receiving empathy and care from others. And so looking at, am I reaching out to people? Am I connecting with people? The loneliness and the isolation, people are reporting higher levels of loneliness than ever before. And it's fascinating because we're more virtually connected. And so people think, well, I'm connecting with this person on WhatsApp and all the things. But that virtual connection is not a replacement for in-person connection. And we see that through the statistics. And so, again, holding yourself accountable of reaching out to people, seeing people in person. And with all of these things, it's important to remember that you're not going to want to do any of them.
Yeah.
You're not going to want to do any of these things. You're not going to want to get curious about your anxiety. You're not going to want to journal. You're not going to want to try a new behavior. You're not going to want to reach out to a friend. But what we have to remember is that if nothing changes, nothing changes. And our biggest, when we are struggling with anxious feelings and depressive feelings, the biggest hurdle we face are those feelings. It zaps our energy level, it zaps our desire, and it zaps our motivation. But it's the sort of thing that if we can take one small step, that will help propel us to take the second small step. We just have to start taking the first small step and just recognize it's going to feel uncomfortable, but I can feel uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with feeling uncomfortable. Now I'm getting off on a tangent, but that's the other thing with anxiety.
Yeah.
We avoid anxiety. We avoid things that make us feel anxious because it makes us feel uncomfortable. And there's so many things out there right now that are making us feel uncomfortable. But reminding ourselves, it is okay if I'm uncomfortable. It's not going to crush me. I can live through the discomfort of the next hour of doing this thing because on the other side, there is freedom and there is growth and there is healing.
I love that.
Thank
That's
you.
mic drop.
Okay.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
But it made me think, it's almost like, don't be afraid to go to the gym of life.
Yeah.
You haven't worked out for 2 years.
Yeah.
You start somewhere. Get on the treadmill. You're just going to walk for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Lift a few weights.
That's right.
And then you get and it's gonna feel uncomfortable. You're not gonna like it. You're gonna be sore afterwards. But then you're gonna get stronger. And
That's
the next time you run for 30 minutes,
That's
or
right.
you lift a little more weights.
That's
and then pretty soon you're strong, back to the way you want to be, and maybe even continue to welcome those things and relish those things and say, I want to make myself uncomfortable because I've been growing and I like that feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, of course, I ask all my guests this question. As we get towards the end here, what's one good general life hack for us for how we can either build better relationships or have healthier conversations, either at home or at work? Any particular life hack for us today?
I don't know if this is a life hack, but this is the first thing that came to my mind, is just becoming more self-aware. Just more self-awareness, just getting more curious about ourselves, not taking every feeling as fact, not taking every assumption we make about other people's behavior as fact, and just getting curious. I'm feeling anxious today. What's that about? I'm feeling really irritated today. What's that about? I just ate a whole sleeve of Oreos. What's that about? Right? And just that curiosity of, let me get to know myself better so that I can have more productive responses, so that I don't give into the knee-jerk, cut the person off because they cut me off and I'm going to show them, but so that I can have more productive responses, so that I can connect with people in a healthier way, so that I can identify, this job really isn't the right job for me. This level of anxiety and discomfort is a sign that this isn't a good fit. And so again, that self-awareness, being curious about ourselves, it is it creates the most positive ripple effect in our lives.
Excellent. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Timely, perfect, practical.
Thank you.
And insightful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So if people want to learn more about you, follow you, get connected to you,
Yes.
join any of the things you're doing, where can they go?
Yes, you can go to my website, my personal website, mazirobinson.com. You can also go to Cultivate's website, cultivateatlanta.com. And you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Cultivate Atlanta. And I post pretty much every day. So,
And Mazi, M-A-Z-I,
yes,
just for folks listening,
Yes.
in case they're misspell it and they can't find you.
That's right, that's
we
right.
wouldn't want that to happen.
we would not want that to happen.
Excellent. Mazi, thank you. Always a gift. So glad you came on.
Oh, thanks.
Look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. Me too. Thanks for having me.
Wasn't that a great conversation? I love that conversation. Now, there was some scary things in that conversation. Mazi made a point to say, yeah, before there was burnout and we were kind of very tired. And she said, this is next level. And if we didn't think we could go to a next level, we've arrived. We're there. And it's a state of depletion. And she talked about things. She said, we're more easily overwhelmed. We're getting cranky in traffic. We're having a hard time making decisions. We're ruminating over decisions. We're just feeling no motivation. We're feeling out of control. And it's just causing us to just feel in this stuck place. And what I loved about the conversation that I hooked onto was this idea of rumination. And when we ruminate, it's often because we are sitting literally in a room. We're not going out. We're not seeing people. We're not doing the things we did before. And we're afraid to do those things. And I talked about my own challenges being a speaker and doing speaking engagements and having high anxiety around that. And Mazi and I talked about getting that agency and that sense of resilience back. And so to move to the very end, she said the 3 steps for us to take. She said, first, get curious about your anxiety. What's causing you anxiety? Name it. Don't be afraid to say it out loud. When we don't name it, it just gets bigger. Then she says, think of creating those baby steps. What are some ways you can just start to move forward on that? If you're nervous about eating out in a restaurant, well, go to a restaurant and pick up food. Take it back to your car and eat it in your car or take it home. And then eat it outside of the restaurant. So those little baby steps. And then finally, she said, look for connections in life. She said, we are at all-time low for loneliness and connection. And so she said, how can we build those relationships up, reach out to people, and avoid some of those things they're isolating for us? And then she reminded us too, we're not going to like doing any of those 3 things. But just moving on those baby steps, moving forward in life, getting back into the gym of life and starting to build up our muscles are going to help us get back to the life we had before. So I hope you took away something from there that you can start to put in place for you that's going to help you feeling strong, feeling resilient, feeling motivated, ready to make a difference in the world.